Earlier this year, we started to renovate an old nursery office to a livable tiny house, which we're now calling the Meadow Home. The area where the old office is located was really overgrown, with some trees having succumbed to deer browse and rampant barberry bushes crowding out some of the pre-existing specimen trees that had been planted by one of the previous owners. We wanted to help liberate some of the plants and rediscover the shape of the bed so that it would complement the new renovations on the Meadow Home. Hey guys, it's a beautiful day today. It's very foggy today, so it gives it a little bit more of an ethereal character. I will say that we have a tiny house build that we're actually filming as well happening behind me, so you may hear some rumbling and spray foaming that's actually happening today. We'll try to keep it here though, and your attention here, because this is part of our Meadow Home landscaping project. This is a beast of a project. There's actually more than this bed to actually have landscaped. But boy, oh boy, it was a big project, and I'll share a little more why. Not only is this a fairly sizable bed, but most of the work actually happened because we had to undo a lot of things that had been done here. And I'll probably share some information. You may say, oh, I would have left it that way. And there's so many different philosophies of what you could do, but the largest task that had to be done here was that this bed had plastic, black plastic, so that geotextile weed suppression material that was in the bed. There might still be a little left on the edges, but what I don't like about plastic, I do think that there is room for that geotextile material in all different types of landscaping. Like for instance, our friends who run a farm, they farm for commercial production. They roll out some of that geotextile material underneath maybe their strawberries or some of their other plants so that it's easy to pick and they're not sitting on the soil, and it has weed suppression for the season. It's a quick annual crop. They end up picking it and then they end up taking the geotextile material up. We use it sometimes with tile drainage to go over the tile drainage so that no dirt or grime actually falls into it, which is what we did here. So I'm not like an absolutist saying like, oh, never use it, but I don't really love using it in a garden bed. And part of the reason for that is, you know, was an old bed, an older bed, and you could see we didn't plant some of these larger tree specimens or these shrubs, which are absolutely gorgeous and beautiful, and we're so thankful that they're here. But when we started to take it up, you had this leaf litter on top and all this soil, because the soil was forming on top because all this leaf litter was falling on top. And then you had this geotextile material that doesn't, degrade or microdegrades. And then you had all this other organisms underneath. So nary did that top layer of organisms and that bottom layer of organisms ever interact. So taking that out, I feel like we freed the soil organisms a bit. And now there could be upward and downward mobility for those soil organisms, which is so important, and also for roots. So instead, what I opted to do, look at all these cute parasol fungi happening right here. It's so adorable. It's like a whole little world. What I ended up opting to do was just reshaping the bed, finding that bed, removing that plastic geotextile material, which honestly was a beast. I nearly hurt my back in the process. So we brought our friend Steve over, who has a tractor, and he was able to tear out some of the rest of it that I didn't get out. I got about 2/3 of the way. Then I knew we wouldn't have time for this bed, and so I just layered it with cardboard. I think I used all of our cardboard here and had to come back to put more cardboard because we ran out. And then I just so heavily mulched it, which is not typically something I would do with such a heavy mulch, because you want to always make sure that the mulch is pulled away, and sometimes it creeps up on the base of the trees that you plant, or the trees that had been planted here. So you don't want the mulch right up to here, you see that? So I just want to kind of pull that away, and it kind of sometimes moves in. Now that's dirt, so that's good. And the reason is because this maintains a lot of moisture, and you don't want that moisture right up against this area, or else it could actually rot the tree from the base. So that's one thing. And then two, I've been doing a lot more research on our specialist pollinators, native bees, especially the ground nesting ones, because the majority of them actually ground nest. They can't ground nest in such thick mulch. But the reason why I did this is largely because not to have a lot of mulch, but to suppress the weeds, to just buy the time for me to come down here and start planting it. And I did start planting it. I started planting it. I had this verbena, which I absolutely loved. I think this one's called cultivars Bampton or Brampton. And I only bought like 3 or 4 of them, and boy, oh boy, I love them. They're kind of like this wispy, almost like this bronze fennel-y type of kind of shape, but very compact, and these tiny little purple flowers that just stick out at the ends, like little thumbs. So I love this one. I could not get it after I purchased it, and it's not cold hardy here, but I think like the Verbena bonariensis, which is that the lollipop one that's oh so famous in so many gardens and loved by pollinators, I might actually see if this one will reseed itself. Sometimes it reseeds in places that you don't want, but I think it's really beautiful, and I might want to like edge the whole bed with it. The other thing I was trying out is this Spirobolus heterolepsis, and this is one of our native grasses, and this actually looks small right now. Some people say it will start smelling like a little bit of like popcorn flavor, but it becomes like a little gumdrop. And my idea for this bed is it would take a lot to fill this bed. This gets about maybe 12 to 16 inches around. I'll probably pop some of these out and start putting them in here, and then I'm going to get another load of Spirobolus heterolepsis that I could just plant in here, so it'll just be kind of like a grassy main, like just a little grassland here. And then I'm planting today more key shrubs. So these are shrubs that will get, depends on the shrub, like this Fothergilla here, will get about maybe 3 to 4 feet around, and we'll just fill up a bit more space, because that's what we need to do. But I don't want to plant too many shrubs, because you run into this situation where you have these large rooted trees now, because you're not planting them all at the same time. It's not a clean bed, and the chances of you hitting a root are great. So I want to keep the shrubs to a minimal and just have these things that will fill out larger spaces. This is a nice plant. It's not a native. We have a native unanimous. This is a unanimous Alata compactus. And we got this one for you, Sandra, because you really you're like, oh, I love that tree, how bright red. Bright red. You hear that?
Like your shirt.
Like my shirt here. Yeah, it becomes literally the most fiery red that you could start to see it's turning, because it's almost fall. And people love it for that reason. And the compactus version can get around 8 feet if you don't prune it. But I think this will fill out the space really nicely and complement this kind of greenish blue siding that we have of the meadow house. But I'm just kind of taking off the cues that we have already here. So you'll see this paper bark paper bark maple, which has this lovely burgundy red, crimson, orangish color to the bark. And then they had this Physocarpus opulifolius. This is probably some cultivar, darker cultivar, which is based off of one of our native shrubs. And I absolutely adore this plant. I only really learned about it here because this grows so well. And I love the shape of it. We've actually took off a few cuttings of it as we were kind of shaping the bed, because it just kind of roots up. And it loves the environment, and the pollinator, when it's in flower, you can see some of the spent blooms here. When this thing is in flower, oh my God, it is just drenched in pollinators. As I was stepping back and I was kind of seeing, okay, well, what are the trees and the shrubs that we keep? Because man, this poor thing, it was crushed by the snow. It was broken in the middle of one of the main big stems. So if you could see this Pinus strobus nana, it was really getting shaded out. Probably has no airflow here. It was really getting shaded out by the barberry. I think this could be a really cool structural tree. I mean, obviously a lot of the green is on top, but I bet if we free up some of these stems, it could look really sculptural. So you can see right here, I think the weight of the snow actually broke this massive branch, so I had to cut it off. You can see it was dead. The needles are still green on it, but this is a really bad place to get broken, especially on the main trunk of this tree. So hopefully it'll survive. You can see it's kind of sapped out, and then the branch was broken and just was dying, and you could see some of the black kind of decaying matter on both of these branches, and you know that could invite some fungal and bacterial rot. So as I open up this tree, it'll get more airflow, and hopefully the branches won't be laden with snow, which could break all the other branches. You can see all these dead needles in here. They're not going to come back. So once it's like late spring, summer, I'll probably end up cutting back some of those dead branches. And here you can see they're crisscrossing quite a bit. So I'll have to make some decisions on what I actually want to cut. This branch with the tag on will actually go. I just haven't cut it because it has the tag on, and I'm not going to do any of the major cuts. I just told myself, you know, it's almost spring. I just told myself I'll cut the dead branches. I went a little bit further than maybe I should have, but I know that if we get another snow in, you know, that might actually break more of this beautiful Pinus strobus. And maybe it doesn't look so beautiful now, but it really is. It just needs a chance, and it needs a haircut. So I had to come in here and like basically shape it up, and you see that that's where the stem broke. Look at that, it's so shameful. It's like on the main trunk, and it just so happens that that happens with the snow, the amount of snow that we get. You know, in Japan, they'll build these structures over the top of them like a teepee. It's kind of crazy. They just have these triangular structures that they build over, and it looks very sculptural and beautiful. Maybe we could try it down the line and see if it actually works, but that's to keep the snow off of these so that they don't get crushed under the snow, and then it becomes this like sculptural garden, which I think is kind of cool too. Here's one of the ones that we took out. That was just basically a cutting of our regular Physocarpus. And then right near Saunders' foot is this what is it called? Tanima no Yuki, which I think means snow on the mountain or valley of the snow. And this gets a little white and then pink on top when it starts to grow, and it stays small. And I thought that would play nicely with the blue of this like twisted needles of the pine. And I love the whites and purples for flowers. So that's kind of what we're going for. When I step back from here and look at the color of the meadow house, I start seeing these like light blues and light greens. And I was looking at the color palette of this bed, which, you know, is primarily this like reddish burgundies, white flowers, and this kind of bluish green hue. And I was like, well, let's bring more of that into the bed. So I got this spirea, which actually is looking a little sad because this is one I actually ordered in. So it came via post, which is normally fine, but it got stuck in the post for about a week. So I think it's looking a little sad, but we're gonna plant that up today, and it gets a nice white flower, but in spring. And then this is obviously blooming in summer and fall, so that will be nice. You get spring flowers and fall flowers. And then this one is my fave. This is Fothergilla X Intermedia Blue Shadow, it's called. Look at that blue. So I think that plays off really nicely. And initially I had just had another Physocarpus in here, but it was too much red. And that's one thing I should say. The other thing about this bed is that it had a ton of barberry, like a wall of barberry. You couldn't really see the beautiful structure of the conifers that we had in here. Plus, I don't really like barberry. It has a lot of redeeming characteristics, like don't get me wrong, there's not another plant like it because it has all different colorways. It's not a native though, and it actually started to penetrate some of the woods and the meadows around here, and it can get pretty invasive. It has these really thick thorns, and it's actually a good medicinal plant, so there's a lot of redeeming characteristics about it, but because we don't have an analog to it here, it does get a little aggressive, and it actually created this wall that I just had to remove. I tried to take it all out by the root, and then Steve came in and actually helped us take some of the roots out as well. So it freed up a lot of the space of the bed, and I wanted to bring in different leaf shapes as opposed to having a wall of that. I wanted to have some different leaf shapes. One more that I should cover before we actually get to it. Well, two more. Here's some of our native verbena, Verbena canadensis. Three more, I lied. Look, I'm lying today. And this is a beautiful grass that I actually don't know whether it's going to be hardy or not, but I have it in the pollinator bed. This is a Mexican feather grass, and it gets a little white tuft on top. And you could see the way that it attracts the dew and like moves in the wind, and it has a much more upright feature compared to the Sprobolus, which will look more like a gumdrop. So that's what I like about that. And then this is a Salix purpurea nana, and I was thinking of putting it back down there because I liked the different leaf structures. You could see that this has a nice also bluish green leaf. You can't see it from here, but when it starts to get a little older, it gets like a purplish stem, very much like the burgundy purple that we have here in the Physocarpus and the paper bark maple. And then it kind of hardens off to a little gray, which would then kind of match the grayness in the house. And this gets to be about 4 to 5 feet wide and high, and it's a little shrubby willow. And willow, Salix, is probably the second most important tree for our wildlife around here. This is not a native willow, but it has naturalized in the area, and it's popularly used in kind of like landscape restoration. And I just really like the form and the color, so I thought it would go well here. Let's try one, and then if we need to dot some more, then that would be really wonderful. So what we're gonna do here today is basically like plant up some of those key shrubs, and I already pre-dug the holes, so you don't have to see me struggle through them, but there's some things that I started to see about these plants, because like I said, some of them I ordered in. I didn't go to like a local garden center because they just didn't have them available at local garden centers. So the good thing is sometimes you could get stuff online and they could send them in, but you can't pick your specimen, and sometimes you can't control the when it comes in. But they had a hard time, is what I'm saying, in the mail. So what I'm going to use today is Espoma's Biotone, and this is such a good product. They have endomycorrhizal, ectomycorrhizal fungi, and it also contains lots of good bacteria, so a lot of bacillus. And this has an expiration date. You know, this is a living material, a living fertilizer, essentially. It's great for transferring items from a nursery pot into the earth. And actually, Steve, who helped us out here, he was so grateful because we gave him a bunch of this stuff for his garlic, and I think we gave him a few bags at the very least. And he was planting his garlic this year, and he's like, man, this is good stuff. I got it all right in. So he swears by it too. He loves it. And you can see that I don't have much left in this bag, but this should be a fine amount for what we have here, what we need to plant today, at least. And then, we do have some of our own compost up there, but it's about 1,200 feet up that way and back. And we don't have the use of the back of our UTV because Saunders turned it into a mobile tool shed. So Espoma has this land and sea gourmet compost, and you can see that it contains lobster and crab meal. So I figured just spreading a little bit of the compost on top and then kind of pushing away a bit more of the mulch around some of these plants so they're not necessarily drowning in mulch, because that mulch served its purpose, but it doesn't need to be so thick on these plants. So let's get started on that, huh? See, look at how crispy these leaves look. I mean, it actually wasn't dry, surprisingly, when I got it out of the box, but the leaves are crispy, which I felt a little bad. So it doesn't look as redeeming as I think it will look like next year. So I'm gonna put a little bit of that biotone in the hole, and I'm just gonna take this out and inspect the roots. Yeah, so this is nicely rooted. It is a bit, maybe a bit root bound. And these are the things that you could actually like look at when you were going to a store and you're like looking and inspecting some of those roots. So you could kind of come in here, even if you have like a little hoary knife and you can scour the edges. I don't have one on me and I'm not gonna run upstairs to go get it.
Sometimes scratching
yeah,
it like this
that's good.
works. Kind of make a claw and then just go at
look
it.
at that, Sonder. Yeah, there you go, that's nice.
Yeah, you kind of need to do it with your bare
I know you kind of, but
then you get this.
Yeah, I know. I still have my manicure looking somewhat decent. Isn't that surprising after 2 weeks?
Well, you might have to be filming.
I haven't been working hard enough, huh? Okay, don't say that. You know, that's where that kind of lands. And then I'm just gonna, I don't even need a shovel. And actually, you could see what our normal soil looks like. It has this more clay material, which, you know, clay isn't bad. Sometimes it's hard to work with. People complain about it. But what I like about these beds is that they have been actually, even though they have this geotextile material on top, they had been acquiring soil after all this time. And some of the beds here are heavily, heavily amended. So our soils have become a bit more workable, honestly, which is very nice for the gardener, because she or he would not want to be fighting such soil if it had never been amended. And a lot of that soil on top of the plastic sheeting that they had here was very nice, and there was lots of life in there. So I'm so stoked to be able to kind of join the top layer with the bottom layer.
The reason why this bed is so big is that there used to be an old foundation here for a house.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
So you have the separation layer where there's concrete, kind of like what you see here.
Right, yeah. Yeah, because
you might have the soil sitting on top of that.
Because the original house was here, right? Yeah, and then they took it down and they built this little, what was formerly a nursery office, essentially. So I'm gonna use some of this compost. I might have a little too much of it, actually, but I wanted to bring 3 bags down, just in case. And, you know, I think they wanted a nice garden too, yeah, because this was, the nursery eventually moved down to here. Ooh, look at that. Nice. Smells nice too. That looks really nice. It's maintained its moisture nicely. Oh, these plants are gonna love this going into fall. Absolutely. Absolutely marvelous. And I'm sure all those organisms. I definitely want to do basically a survey of some of those organisms in this bed and compare it to other beds too. It'd be nice to see what we have underneath, helping out these tree and shrub roots here. Okay, that's one. Let's go over to this one, which is my favorite in the bed. I think it just looks so good, complementing, pulling in the colors of this Pinus strobus, and yet complementing, like contrasting with this Physocarpus, and then pulling in some of those colors of the house. Ooh, I just love the leaf shape. Fothergias are nice. Now, I did pull this out already, so I kind of cheated on you, but it was really striking to me. Look, I pulled it out. Very, very shallow root system. What a bummer. So I think this either got, there's a couple things I could think of, and this is again, one of the straining points when you actually purchase something online. You cannot pick your plant if I saw this in the store, even though the top part of this looks really nice, the bottom part, it's like half a cake, a third of a cake. You're like, well, where's the rest of my cake? I ordered the full cake and now I only got the icing on the top.
I ate it.
The roots didn't make it all the way down to the bottom. I'd rather get something a little root bound. Yeah, you can see there's not even any roots in here. That's some nice soil, but nothing that looks like roots. So my prediction is that they probably put a ton of fertilizer and juiced this bad boy up to get it bigger so they could sell the plant more quickly. And it hasn't developed its roots. It just kind of grew too quickly for itself. So what we're gonna do is try to give this guy a better life and put some of this in for the transfer process and let it know that now it can take its time to grow. Doesn't need to be totally juiced up all the time. But I dug a much bigger hole without looking at the roots because I was confident that this was a big plant. Like, they sell it to you as a big plant. I mean, part of the reason, you know, I didn't want to get all small plants and when I'm already working with such big plants, so I wanted to get things that were like slightly bigger. But sometimes the nurseries will just juice up the plants, get them nice and big, and put them in a bigger bucket and then charge you $40 more. So you just got to watch out for that. And again, this is one of the benefits of going to one of your local nurseries and something that you could, or even one of your local growers, because some of our nurseries actually grow their own plants, right? So hopefully this guy can just even out now and know that he's in good company with some of these other plants. Now, I did plant some of the other fothergillas in the front of the bed, actually, which they're native plants. Some of them are native. This one's ex intermedia, so this one's a hybrid and a cultivar. I was like, oh, this is a big thing of soil, but it's a stone. And I love the leaf shape. It reminds me of a bit of a witch hazel. And actually, I was even thinking maybe I would put a witch hazel in here somewhere. I like the kind of scraggly, unkempt nature of witch hazels, but this does remind me of a witch hazel leaf. So that looks pretty good. I'm just gonna step around the soil and compress it a bit more because it does not have an extensive root system. And I wanna make sure that it's in there. In fact, I'll have to come down here later and water all these in. It's been generous with the rain. We had a break in rain finally. You can see our lawn is unmowed and a little wild because going into the fall season because just haven't been able to mow with all the rain. Just give it a little compost on top. We don't have to overdo it because this is quite good soil. There you go. Very good. Step back. Oh, yeah. And that will fill out as well. And I will say when I was digging the hole here, I did hit a root and I couldn't tell. It was probably this Norway spruce that I hit. So that's one of the challenges when you're kind of working with a kind of pre-established bed to a certain degree. You're like, oh, I gotta work around these roots, and you hate to actually hit one with your shovel. It's a shame, actually. So let's go and plant the salix. Man, you should always pre-dig holes. It just goes so much faster. This is a really nice root system. Look at that. It's like coming off the barkier mulch here. And this is actually grown by a local nursery, I will say that. And that's how I discover sometimes some new plants as well, where I'm like, ooh, that's cool. And sometimes you're just attracted by the shape or the color or the leaf or something along those lines, that, and then you have to learn about the plant a bit more. And that's how I learned about this one. And willows, I might not have to actually get another one of these, because willows, I mean, I think if anybody has willows, they know how quickly and easily you could propagate those by just taking and cutting and sticking it in the ground. So if I really like this one, that's the benefit. Once you have the specimen, you could just continually propagate it over and over again. So that's something that I might actually do. So that's really lovely. You can see this fothergill had been eaten back a little bit in the beginning of the year. And all this new growth, look at this kind of electric yellow-orange growth, which again, I think complements so well. If that's what the new growth looks like in the beginning of the season, whew, that'll be a nice complement. All right, last on our list is these little verbenas. And again, our verbenas are just really lovely pollinator plants. And I think that we kind of favor some of the non-native verbenas, which, as you know, I've had that cultivar in there, which I do love. But I was like, well, let's also grow some of our native ones as well in here. And that way it won't be a fully non-native bed, which this is not. We do have a lot of like quote unquote nativars. People don't like that term, I found out, but I'll use it here, which are native cultivars. Physocarpus and this Pinus strobus, they're native here, but they are cultivated varieties. And these herbaceous perennials, they won't get large, too large, but they will be a bit more robust. Look at that beautiful root system. I think this was a native nursery as well that I got this at. Now I can't recall, but.
Local?
Oh yeah, sorry, native. Local nursery, thank you. I have native on the brain. Ooh, nice, look at those roots. This one's even healthier. Nice extensive root system. So, see, this is almost all mulch, which is not bad. I've like planted in all mulch because this is a mulch that has been really aged. So I'm gonna put some more of that on top of this grass. And the one thing that I was interested to see if it would grow, and it seems to be doing fine, but we should see what happens in the winter. That's Sporobolus heterolepsis, which is that grass, that native grass I mentioned. It does not need to be in this heavy mulch. It could handle being in like stone, basically. And that's where it would natively grow. So my hope is that it's going to be fine in this richer soil, which it seems like it is. And it's actually even flowering, which is fun to see. I always love seeing the inflorescences of the grasses because they could be quite beautiful, especially in the fall and going into winter. And not only providing seasonal ornamental interest there, but also providing food for birds in the fall and winter when food is getting scarcer and scarcer. And that I'm hoping will spread a bit more, because we did also seed Sporobolus heterolepsis in the meadow. Whether that comes up, I'm not sure, but these are plugs, so we started them. It's a little bit easier to start from plugs than seeds, because you don't know whether the seeds will actually germinate or establish themselves, and it takes 3 years for them to establish themselves. These are already kind of good seasoned plugs. All right, so let's move these bags off. Oh yeah, I mean, you still see so much space in the bed, but you have to also imagine it 3-4 years down the road of what it's actually going to look like when those shrubs become almost as big as these shrubs, which they actually won't because I got more compact versions. But even that Physocarpus in the middle, I have that, and it could get big like that, and if you don't cut it back. I failed to mention the beautiful weeping birch that we planted, the Jungii birch. is one of the birches that we got that's a bit older, that has that nice white crisp bark, and that will have some winter interest as well, just as the paper bark maple does and the conifers will. And even the hydrangea flowers, they'll stay on throughout fall and winter if you don't cut them out. So this bed is an all-season bed, I think, and it's a really good start. We're getting that structure down. We'll start getting some of those herbaceous grasses and perennials in, and my oh my, I think this is a really lovely swerve leading up to the Meadow House. Thanks for watching our works in progress here at Flock. We'd love your support for the channel, so if you care to contribute, consider liking, subscribing, hitting the notifications button, and even tipping. We reinvest 10% of our Google AdSense revenues back into community projects here in the Finger Lakes, which is matched by our partners at Espoma Organic. So even if you're not in the area, your support matters. Thank you, and we'll see you in the next update.